You know sugar, I know sugar. It's in our coffee, our desserts, pretty much everything we eat. But behind that sweetness, there's this hidden, brutal history. A story about a substance so valuable they called it white gold, and its production created a system so profitable it literally built empires and laid the blueprint for the world we live in right now.
I mean, just look at how our appetite for it exploded. Back in 1700, the average person had maybe 4 pounds of sugar in an entire year. A century later, it was 18 pounds. By 1900, 90 pounds. And today, you and I are consuming over 150 pounds a year. And get this, that didn't just happen. This jump from a rare luxury to a daily staple was engineered. It was built.
But what was the cost of building that sugar habit? Well, it's this number right here. 7. 7 years. That was the average life expectancy for an enslaved African from the moment they set foot on a Caribbean sugar plantation. Just let that sink in for a second. 7 years. That was the price for making sugar cheap and plentiful.
So, that brings us right to the dark heart of this story, a deadly sweetness. How on earth did something so common, so sweet, become one of the deadliest commodities in human history? Let's break it down.
To really get it, you just have to follow the money. Sugar wasn't just another crop like tobacco or cotton. No, it was the absolute economic engine of the entire Atlantic world. The profits were so off the charts, so astronomical, that it created this insatiable, ruthless demand for more of it, and of course, for the bodies needed to produce it. And that demand created something you can only really call the sugar machine. You see, the very nature of the sugarcane plant required a relentless, non-stop production process. And that process, in turn, demanded a workforce that could never leave. Here's why. It's a biological problem. Unlike cotton, which you can just pick and store, sugarcane starts to rot almost immediately. We're talking within 24 hours of being cut, so you couldn't just harvest it and ship it somewhere else. This one little detail meant every single plantation had to be 2 things at once: a huge farm to grow the stuff, and an industrial factory to process it on the spot, both operating in perfect, brutal sync.
So just picture this process. First, you have people cutting cane with heavy machetes for 12, sometimes 16 hours a day in the blistering Caribbean heat. Then they have to immediately feed that cane into these massive, dangerous rollers, where one slip, one moment of exhaustion could cost you an arm. And right after that, the juice was taken to the boiling houses, rooms that were literally over 120 degrees, like an inferno, where you could be horribly burned. And this cycle didn't stop. During harvest, it ran 24/7.
So when you lay it all out like this, that 7-year life expectancy, it starts to make a horrifying kind of sense, doesn't it? It wasn't just bad luck. It was the predictable outcome of a system that combined total physical exhaustion, rampant disease, deliberate starvation to cut costs, and constant horrific accidents. Death wasn't a risk of the job. It was a feature of the business model. So what was driving this unbelievably cruel machine? Well, it all came down to the price of profit. This wasn't just random cruelty. The system was designed this way because cold, hard numbers showed that treating human lives as disposable was the best way to make money.
Look at the investment returns back then. If you were wealthy in the 1750s, you could buy a safe government bond and get maybe 4% back. A little riskier, commercial shipping might get you 8%. But a sugar plantation? That was a golden ticket. It promised returns of 15 to 20%, year after year after year. For an investor sitting in London, it was, quite simply, the most profitable business on the entire planet.
And here's the twisted, cold-blooded logic that made it all work. An enslaved person wasn't seen as an employee. They were a capital expense, listed in the account books right next to the machinery. The financial models just accepted that most would die quickly. And the final, chilling calculation was this. It was literally cheaper to work a person to death over a few years and then just buy a replacement than it was to give them enough food, rest, and medical care to let them live longer. Disposability was more profitable.
The scale of the wealth this created it's just hard to even wrap your head around. Get this, a single tiny island like Jamaica was generating more profit for the British Empire than the colonies of New York, Virginia, and Massachusetts all put together. That's the power sugar had. It turned these little specks of land in the Caribbean into the most valuable real estate in the world. This gusher of money created a whole new class of super rich. The saying back then was, rich as a West Indian planter. That was the 18th century way of saying billionaire. But that wealth didn't just stay on the islands. Oh no, it flowed back to Europe, where it funded the Industrial Revolution, built the famous universities we know today, and created the very foundations of our modern banking system.
Now here's the really crucial part. This system didn't just disappear when slavery ended. It left behind an enduring blueprint. The techniques for managing labor, for extracting maximum work for minimum cost, those were perfected on sugar plantations, and they became the model for the modern factory and eventually the modern corporation. I mean, the parallels are kind of shocking when you see them side by side. The gang system used to organize field labor that evolves directly into scientific management. The obsession with maximum labor extraction. Today we call that productivity metrics. And the chilling idea of planned worker obsolescence, of just using people up. Well, it echoes in corporations today that treat high employee turnover as a normal cost of doing business. The language has changed, but the logic is unnervingly familiar.
And this isn't just some abstract historical thing. You can literally go and see where the money went. It's in the stone walls of the British Museum and colleges at Oxford. It built huge parts of London's financial district. And it created massive family fortunes, like the Drax family, who, get this, still own the same land in Barbados today, more than 300 years later. That wealth didn't vanish, it compounded. But we have to remember the other side of that ledger, the human cost. Over 500,000 people. That's how many enslaved Africans died on the tiny island of Barbados alone, an island that's smaller than most major cities. It became a graveyard for more than 500,000 souls. So, after all of this, what do we do with this awful knowledge? Where does it leave us? And that brings us to the final question. What now? Because really, this isn't about pointing fingers or making people feel guilty today. It's about understanding the architecture of the systems that we've all inherited.
And here's maybe the most powerful lesson of all. When slavery was finally abolished, the plantation owners screamed that the economy would collapse. But you know what? It didn't. Sugar was still produced, the economy kept going. The only thing that collapsed were the obscene, off-the-charts profit margins that were built on working people to death. And that proves it. That level of exploitation was never necessary for production. It was a choice made for profit.
When you understand that history, that this was a calculated business, it totally reframes the modern debate. The call for reparations stops sounding like a request for charity and starts sounding a lot more like a call for accounting. For settling a documented financial debt that was created centuries ago and was simply never paid.
In the end, what the sugar plantation did was perfect a business model. How to generate maximum profit by pushing the human cost onto someone else. It created an incredibly effective blueprint for extraction. And that leaves us with one last lingering question. That blueprint was set 300 years ago. Who is still using it today?